the high price of failure, especially in a corporate environment. When you're asking for a lot of money, what happens when it fails? Learn from the failures of others, and then you can leverage that and not do that yourself. So Jim Edmunds, the CEO of Ingenious, is going to be talking about the high cost of failure. Jim.
Thank you, Jack. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Tuesday of LavaCon 2018. I think we're just waiting for getting our slide up here. And also welcome to all of the people who are streaming in remotely for today's conference. Today I'm going to talk about enterprise content strategy and some of the lessons we've learned and mistakes we've seen from working with our customers over the years. But before I do that, I want to tell you a story. I want to tell you a story about maps in journeys and how success often comes disguised as failure. I'm a collector of antique maps, and I thought, this being October, it's appropriate to tell a story about Christopher Columbus and a flawed map and a flawed strategy and how it led to one of the greatest discoveries in the history of Western Europe. And like all journeys, whether you're charting an expedition into uncharted territories or whether you're building an enterprise content strategy, it starts with a map. In Columbus's case, that map was Ptolemy's map of the world. Created in 150 AD, it was a remarkable work that described the world, the inhabited world, as it was known to the Roman Empire at that time. It described a world from Iceland to Korea and from Scandinavia to the source of the Nile. It would have informed Columbus's worldview and would have been the basis of his strategy for sailing west from Spain to chart a new trade route to the riches of the Orient. Now, I think we're all familiar with the persistent legend that Columbus had to convince his royal sponsors, Ferdinand and Isabella, as well as a skeptical world at large, that the world was actually round and that by sailing west, he wouldn't sail off the edge of the world. The reality was no learned person in 14th century Europe believed that the world was flat. At least since the time of Aristotle, learned people in Europe understood that the world was round. And certainly, it would have been well known to sailors and navigators on an intuitive basis. It formed the basis, Ptolemy's work formed the basis of maps that were being produced in Europe at the time and scholarly works at the time, and those maps and scholarly works were proliferating because of the invention of the printing press in the 1400s. The question really was not whether or not Columbus could get to the Orient by sailing west. That was a given. The question was how long that trip was going to take and whether or not he could keep his crew alive long enough to reach there. Ptolemy calculated that the world was 18,000 miles in circumference. In doing so, he rejected the calculations of his predecessor at the library in Alexandria, Eratosthenes. 350 years earlier, Eratosthenes had calculated the circumference of the world at 25,000 miles, remarkably close to the actual circumference of the world of 24,900 miles. Columbus, in his strategy, actually pushed Ptolemy's calculations even further and calculated the distance to the Orient at 2,500 miles. Had he used Eratosthenes' calculations, he would have realized that distance was more than 11,000 miles, far too long for him to keep a crew alive in order to reach that. Fortunately for Columbus, there was a continent between him and the Orient, and his unexpected encounter with that continent saved his crew, saved his journey, and immortalized him. The rest, as you know, is history. Our conception of the world changed, the maps were redrawn, the Spanish crown accrued empire and fortunes. All of this built on a colossal failure. And I think it's important as we talk about enterprise content strategies and mistakes to avoid that we remember that sometimes failure is inevitable and sometimes failure brings with it the seeds of future success. So let's get into the 10 enterprise content strategy mistakes to avoid. Number one is misjudging your audience. Now, we all know our audience, right? We know who they are, we know what they do. But it's surprising how often we misjudge that audience. And there are a number of reasons why we misjudge our audience. Common mistakes are we assume that our audience wants to consume content in the same way that we create content. Those two models are actually very different and often unconnected. We also assume that our audience will behave in a new environment with a new strategy the same way they behave in the old environment and the old strategy. The reality is you change the environment, you change the strategy, and you will change the behavior. And finally, we think our audience thinks like us. That's not the case. Our audience sees the world very differently than we do. And our job is to identify how the audience sees the world and build a content strategy around that. We work with a company, a life science company, very smart group of people. And they have an incredible customer relationship, incredible customer references. A number of years ago, they wanted to build a community site to take those customer references and leverage them and promote their company and their products to the world at large. And they knew they had great relationships with their customers because their customers told them this on the phone and in emails and would give one-on-one references for the company. But as soon as they put those customers in a community with members at large, they changed their behavior. They no longer felt comfortable sharing those references and those opinions with a community of anonymous users. And so they had to go back and rethink their strategy and build their strategy around the way their audience thought, not around the way they thought. Trying to do too much. So you're defining your enterprise content strategy. By God, you're going to get every feature, every function, every bell and whistle into that strategy. You're trying to do too much. You will run out of time, you will run out of budget, you will be disappointed, but worse, you will spend time, energy, and money on things that don't improve your strategy and don't lead to success. If everything is important, then nothing is important. You have to prioritize and rank the things that you want to do. Take all those things that you want to do and survey your stakeholders, survey your clients and your customers. Let them rank them for you, what's important and what's unimportant. And then pick a small subset to work with and get that out and get feedback on that. That's why it's so important to start by defining the requirements for your enterprise content strategy. Everybody does that, right? You'd be amazed. So defining an enterprise content strategy is hard work. A lot of organizations don't have the intestinal fortitude to undertake that work, let alone the resources to undertake that work. But there's another thing at play here, which is we now live in an agile world, and there's an assumption that your requirements can get defined in the process of doing. And if you think about that, it's patently absurd, right? You wouldn't build any sophisticated, complex process where you define the requirements as you went. You wouldn't build a car that way, you wouldn't build a plane that way, you wouldn't build a medical device that way. You have to start with defining a set of requirements that are going to drive your strategy. We have a government agency that we work with that is responsible for maintaining information and monitoring critical infrastructure in North America. And they recently switched to our technology platform. And the mission and the strategy was, we just want to take what we currently have and we want to put it into a new technology platform and reap the benefits of faster, better, more performant technology. And so we said, fine, great, you can do that. They built that system, but the problem in duplicating that system was they also replicated all the problems, challenges, and shortcomings from the previous system. And so when they took that system out to their stakeholders and their partners, they said, you delivered us something that has all the problems of the old system. And they had to scrap all that work, and they had to bring in the business analysts, and they had to start with the requirements gathering. So you've identified your audience, you've limited your scope of work, and you've defined your requirements. You now have a foundation for a vision. Don't doubt that vision. Doubt is debilitating. Be courageous. Stick with your vision and see your vision to the end. Your vision is your compass. It's how you're going to navigate your content strategy from where you start to where you want to end up. That vision ultimately may have flaws, it ultimately may have failures, but you won't know that if you don't stick with it. You will tack one direction, lose confidence, you will tack another direction, lose confidence, and you'll eventually end up right back where you started, but this time with a demoralized team and no confidence that you can deliver on your strategy. Perfection is the enemy of getting stuff done. Everybody wants to deliver the perfect enterprise content strategy and the perfect enterprise content project. The reality is there is no perfection. There is no perfect project. Perfection will actually prevent you from reaching success because it keeps your project and your strategy out of the hands of your users. The key to success is getting your strategy and getting your project into the hands of users as early as possible, getting their feedback, and then iterating your project. Iteration is a natural aspect of a content strategy, and it is an inherent aspect of digital content. Digital content is the only medium in the world where you get to do it over every single day. Publish a book, you're pretty much done. Make a movie, you're done. Make a digital content project, and you get to change it tomorrow, and you get to change it the next day. Iteration is the key to success. If you don't have great content, the best content strategy in the world isn't going to save you. Great content, well-designed content, well-presented content is absolutely essential for people adopting your content strategy and utilizing your content. We are visual beings. We process information visually. If you are not going to invest time, effort, and money in the design of your content, in the quality of content, in the presentation of content, it's likely that your audience and your users are not going to use it. We see this all the time. We see organizations that spend lots of time and money on the technology, on the requirements, on the processes, but ultimately don't invest in creating great content. If you don't believe in the value of that, I would suggest that you start reading some of the works of Edward Tufte, who has really not only just written the book on the visual design of information, he's actually written 4 books on it. Do you have a hook? What's a hook? A hook is that compelling aspect that brings your audience into your enterprise content strategy. It's the conversion event, it's the transaction, it's the way your users interact with that content. If you don't have a hook, you can have great content, you can have great design, you can have great features and functionality. If you don't have a hook, you don't have a way of getting customers to engage or getting your audience to engage with your content. We rolled out an intranet at our company a number of years ago, and it was in response to consistent complaints from our staff that they didn't have a place where they could go to get the information they needed. And they wanted it all in one place. So we spent a year designing this. We had great content. We had great design. We rolled it out, and it was a desert. Nobody showed up. Nobody used it. Until we put two small applications in there. One application was a time tracker. We asked for people to track their time and create a diary of what they worked on every day. And the other was an out-of-office notifier, which told people who was in the office, who was out of the office, and where they were and what they were doing. Those two applications, those two hooks, completely changed the engagement model with our intranet. Usage skyrocketed, people were using it every day, and as a result of getting in there every day, they were accessing all of the other features and benefits of that intranet. The hook is how you get people engaged with your strategy. Content today is full of barriers. Information is fragmented, and it's segmented, and it's siloed. It's very difficult to break silos and unify silos. And information is increasingly more siloed, more fragmented, and more segmented because of the proliferation of cloud-based applications and point solutions. Your job is to figure out how you can bridge those silos. If you don't, you will create friction for your audience to access that content, and they will not adopt your strategy. Nobody wants to have multiple logins. Nobody wants to have multiple locations. Information wants to be freed. Now, the original version of that, information wants to be free, I don't actually agree with. Information has value, and your content strategy needs to recognize that value, leverage that value, and get a return on its investment in that value. But your information does want to be liberated from the silos where it is currently residing, and you want to make that information available to everybody in the enterprise as appropriate. A number of years ago, we did a project with the United States Navy, and it was a portal, comprehensive portal with information about benefits. And as we discussed how they were going to use the software and discussed the requirements, it became very apparent to us that they wanted to eliminate as much content management and overhead as possible. They wanted to create the content once and be able to forget about it. And they called this fire and forget. Fire and forget is a term that references modern weapon systems that deliver their payload through a guidance system rather than through a human being. Your content strategy is not a cruise missile. It's really more like hand-to-hand combat, right? It's very interactive, and you want to be engaged in those interactions. You want to track those interactions, you want to measure those interactions, you want to get the metrics from those interactions, and you want to bring them back into your process and your strategy. And finally, I know it's a little bit odd that a software CEO is saying this, but technology will not solve the problem. If you think technology will solve the problem, you're heading down the wrong road. Technology is a tool used in the execution of your strategy. It is not your strategy. The strategy here is to catch a mouse. The technology is sort of irrelevant. Either one of these will work. Which technology you choose will depend on a lot of factors. But if I was to make a recommendation to you, I would recommend that you pick a technology platform and a technology vendor that will scale with your requirements as your content strategy changes and evolves over time. All right, so we've identified, we've identified the 10 mistakes. You're going to avoid those mistakes, and your content strategy will be a success, right? If only that were the case. Content strategies take time, and they take effort, and they're often marked by a series of small victories and small failures. The reality is nobody's going to build you a triumphal arch for a successful content and enterprise content strategy. We talked about things to avoid. I want to leave you with a couple of strategies for success. First of all, Focus on the audience. Focus on the way they want to consume content, not on the way you want to create content. Iterate. Constantly get feedback of what you're doing. Incorporate that feedback into perfecting your strategy, iterate it, and continue the feedback loop. And embrace failure. Failure is inevitable. Embrace it, learn from it, and perfect your strategy. At the end of his life, Christopher Columbus was an embittered and defeated man. He never accepted the failure to find the Orient. To his dying day, he held that he had found the Garden of Eden in Asia, despite overwhelming evidence that the American continent was its own continent. As you think about your enterprise content strategy and the mistakes to avoid, remember that mistakes are inevitable. But learn from those mistakes, incorporate those mistakes, and build success, your future success, on the basis of those.